Welcome and good evening. So, the art of the pitch. Simple question, simple statement. How do you get attracted to a pitch of a startup? Georg, or ladies first?
Go ahead.
Ladies first.
All right. So for me, it is not all about the pitch. It's more that your startup is the pitch. So you have to have the red line all across. You have to know all of the answers to the investor. So if you think of your startup as the pitch and you live that, I think you're good.
For Axpo, we look in a broad field of climate tech for our many different divisions. And so for us, it's very important to immediately understand what is actually the use case that the startup is addressing, what do you do better than the competition, and basically what can you bring to Axpo as a strategic investor. So we immediately know who to talk to in the company, because it can get very complex, especially with B2B solutions.
Well, in our case, we are a financial VC, right? We don't have strategic interests like Axpo, for instance. So we really care about the return that we can get with startups at the end of the day. And in order to achieve that, there basically have to be three things that have to happen. So the first is the startup has to be a good fit for our overall investment strategy. In our case, we are relatively broad as a firm overall, but we also have specializations in topics that we really like. For instance, we have never invested in crypto, but we do a lot of AI. We have never invested in e-scooters, but we do a lot of fintech and so on. So it has to be a fit for that and for the stage. Then the second thing is we need to see the right kind of ambition level from a startup, right? And that's often a problem in the Swiss market where everybody is quite modest, right? And that doesn't really work for VCs. We can only invest in companies where we believe that could be the next big unicorn. That's simply our business model. So if you don't send the right ambition level signals, that's probably not going to work for us. And the third aspect is that founders need to be reasonable about what kind of market we are currently in. As you're probably all aware, we are currently in a bit of a downturn. It's not that bad in Switzerland, but it definitely is internationally. So we are not in the bubble of 2021 anymore. And that means that, you know, there have to be realistic expectations about valuations, about round structures and so on, about the overall business plan. So if somebody pitches us and tells us our runway is going to be 12 months, that's not going to fly, right? So it has to be reasonable and a fit for the current market situation.
So Georg, if I just come for a pitch to Axpo and you ask me the question, do you know Axpo? And I just say, you just make energy. Did this happen? Maybe just a startup that didn't know that you do way more than just energy.
Well, a startup, when they come to us and they say Axpo makes energy, then probably they didn't do their homework properly, because we do a lot more than that. Yeah, or what was the question exactly?
So you fail directly by saying, okay.
No, of course not. It's like the B-note, the B-note, no?
Yeah.
So, of course, what is most important about the startup is the essence, is the value add that we get from it, is the use cases that we see. But then, of course, it also matters if the startup themselves did their homework and took a look at how it actually, their solution could work with us and why their solution is interesting to us.
So I can understand that Microsoft has a startup program because they're always looking for young talents, for startups. It's a little bit special because Axpo is like a corporate venture. And what's the role in Microsoft in the whole market with the startups?
Sure. So that was why my question before was maybe a little bit different to Georg's and Andreas's, because yes, of course, Microsoft has a corporate venture arm. I'm 12. But I work for Microsoft for Startups. And we have a global program where we support tech startups with all of our technology, also obviously OpenAI now. And my role is here in Switzerland to connect the ecosystem, to connect startups to the ecosystem. So I take care of all of the partnerships with investors, accelerators, incubators. And here for me, what I do is really, I ask the startups, I support our startups in our program, I do pitch deck reviews with them. I really ask them about the funding strategy. Do they want to do angel or VC? Do you know what the investors are looking for? What are you getting into? And yeah, after that, if I really see a fit somewhere, I do qualified referrals, and therefore hope to support the startups in that way.
Andreas, you are the only one in this little round who has been an entrepreneur yourself. Now you change the line, as well as Ertan Wittwahrheit earlier this evening. How is it for you? I mean, you had been an entrepreneur and you were maybe seeking money, and now you are the one being like the bank. How does that feel? How is it for you being on the other side, and maybe what impact has it for your invests that you had been an entrepreneur yourself?
I would say one of the things that I learned by switching the side of the table is how little as a founder I actually understood how VCs work and what their incentives are, and I can only recommend to you as founders, try to learn about that. Not because you need to glorify VCs, obviously, we are just a solution provider, right? The big scheme of things, but if you want to be successful, you have to understand what the incentives are and how VC firms really operate. I wrote a blog post a while ago about what I learned as a VC that I didn't know as a founder. It's very popular because I think it's a problem that a lot of founders share as well. And one aspect is, for instance, that you need to understand, again, that VCs have a particular focus in their investment, right? And if I can give you any advice for being successful in raising VC money, do your homework, what we heard earlier already, right? Don't go to Expo and have no idea what they're doing. Don't come to us and have no idea what we are doing. Not for our vanity, that's not the point, but just for efficiency. Because if somebody pitches me a biotech idea, cool, I have no clue about biotech, I don't invest in biotech, complete waste of time, unfortunately. It's relatively easy to find out what people really invest in, and that means the specific VC partner, right? So in retrospect, in my time as an entrepreneur, I wasted a lot of time simply pitching the entirely wrong VCs. And again, that's just a very inefficient strategy, and you would be surprised how many completely not fitting pitches we get as a VC all the time, and that's obviously not successful. Another aspect is really try to figure out what the previous patterns were of a particular VC, so which kind of geographies do they like and so on, which kind of stages do they like, what kind of founder patterns do you see maybe in the past. That all increases your chances very dramatically. So again, it's fun to look back on when I pitched many VCs. I think in my career I pitched about 100 VC firms in total, and 95 said no. So that's another thing to understand. You're going to hear a lot of no's. That's just part of the game, and you can reduce that no quota just by doing your homework.
You, as giving money, especially you two guys, to startups, you have had 2 wild years or 3 wild years the last years. What happened that, like, now everything almost has changed? You see a lot of startups going broke. How is it for you as a VCs, like having the money, spending the money, and now holding the money? Let's just put it that way. How is that journey going?
Sorry?
Just describe how the last 4 years had been.
I mean, to put it in a bit of a broader context, right? After the financial crisis in 2008, as you probably know, all the central banks started printing money like crazy, so money flooded the entire market, and much of that went into VC. Why? Because there were basically 0 interest rates, and in venture capital, you saw the promise that you could get very high returns. To give you an idea, in the Berlin ecosystem, for instance, about 2/3 of all VC firms are younger than 10 years, right? So the whole ecosystem has just exploded. In Switzerland, now we have invested about, last year, the entire VC industry, about 10 times the money as compared to 10 years before. So just a flood of money. And that led, especially in the pandemic years of 2020 and 21, to a real hype, right? A real bubble, because it suddenly became so easy to invest, right? Because everything happened on Zoom and very quickly. So that drove up valuations like crazy to very unsustainable levels. And we have now seen, now that interest rates have raised, that this all came crumbling down, and we are now in a much more realistic environment. It's basically a reset to where we were as an industry in 2015 or 16, approximately, in terms of valuations. And that's very painful right now. So I know a lot of you probably have startups that now had to save costs and so on. That sucks. Yes, I know. I've done it as well in previous crises. But it's a very necessary part of the overall entrepreneurial journey, and it's going to be healthy for the overall ecosystem at the end of the day.
So I've been only at Axpo for 2 years, and this is also when they started the Partnering and Investing program. And we don't do just startup investments, or we are a very small team, so we're just starting the snowball in this, but also strategic partnerships with startups. But it might be that climate tech or anything related to the energy transition in particular is an exception to the recent dry out of the market, because there's just so much money flowing in from so many players, be it infrastructure funds, for example, in PV or wind projects, be it the big utilities, be it other strategic investors, that the good ideas will also find funding, or the good ideas with the good teams, with the good pitch, will find funding also in challenging times. What I believe is true for all sectors is that the more challenging the times, the more startups are going to fail, and it's usually not going to be the best of the bunch. So it just gets much more competitive to bring your startup anywhere close to break even, where then you can approach a different kind of funding.
You already said it, the good pitch. So it's just about the 7 minutes, just bring out my slides and you want to invest? Or is it more than that?
I think the 7 minutes is very important, but I don't think it's the most important thing of it. So in a B2B context, you will often have a quite complex solution to a complex problem, and don't fool yourself. Like the investor that you're talking to, even if they're specialized in the sector, you're going to know 10 times more about what you're doing and about your solution and the problem that the investor does. So you have to make it basically foolproof how you explain the value that you bring to the table. So I think that is really key for me in a good pitch, is that the founding team is able to break down a complex solution and a complex problem to a place where I can easily understand it. Because if you look at a lot of pitches, you can't think about 2 hours what it actually means. So while the 7 minutes have to work, of course, you have to be able to go into any level of detail when the question demands it, and that's usually going to come in a longer conversation that follows this 7-minute pitch.
Marusha, you had a lot of pitch desks on your desk. Like, how many are there a year, roughly?
So I have to say I do it reactively.
Oh.
Otherwise, I would do it, I think, twice a day. I would say in the last year, about 30 to 40.
Okay.
So that's less than an investor sees, I think. But I really try to take the time and work with the startup on it.
So you have seen a lot of pitch desks. Are you sometimes as well like comparing to startups on their pitch desk, or are you looking at the pitch desk always neutral on the branch, the type, the goal? Or are you just like, with all your knowledge, giving those girls and guys from the whole perspective an idea, or how do you do that?
I think it's both. So you have to take what you've learned from the previous startup, or also looking at, I think Y Combinator has great sample pitch decks on their website, or how it should be structured, something like that, to really get the knowledge that is out there in the market to help the startups to a certain point. But still, you have to look at each pitch deck individually, because it is an individual startup. So you cannot just compare and say theirs is better or worse. You have to take it all together. And for me, right, you said to the 7 minutes and the pitch, and for me, it's not even to investors. Normally, you don't pitch the 7 minutes, right? You go in a pitching contest, you do your 7 minutes, and there you pitch. But with an investor, obviously, if you meet them at a dinner or at somewhere, sure, you need to pitch your startup, but it's not the pitch that you give in a pitching competition. So I think it's really important that as a founder, you know how to pitch, because also every time you're selling to a customer, you're pitching. So if you cannot do that, there's a missing piece for me.
Maybe to build on that, my personal opinion is that in Switzerland we are over-indexing on these 7-minute pitches for pitching competitions. Sometimes in the VC industry make the joke that in Switzerland there are more pitching competitions than startups by now. And I mean, nothing against these competitions, they're great, right? And they give you exposure, fantastic. But that's not what you really should optimize when you want to raise money from an institutional investor like a VC. In my daily work, I don't listen to pitches at all. I want to see the pitch deck in written form, then I do my research before I even talk to the startup, and then I'm going to ask questions and want very good answers to that, right? Why? Because that shows me that the founders really know what they're doing. They are not just optimizing their presentation skills, which is a useful skill to have, but not that decisive at the end of the day. But I really want to understand, have they thought very, very deeply about their business, right? Are they able to answer all these questions about every aspect of the business? And when you have these conversations with VCs, again, my advice is really think about what does this person probably know about your market, how advanced are they, maybe ask questions about that and so on, and then adapt to that, right? So in my case, I used to be the chief technology officer in my own startup, so I'm reasonably technical, and I typically tell that to people, right? So yes, you're an AI startup, we can get very, very technical, and then very often you see these startups that are just trained for their 7-minute pitch, and they just get stuck in that, and then they start with digitization is changing the world. Yes, I know. What do you do specifically, please, in specific technical terms? So again, it's all about adaptation and about really knowing your business in all aspects of what is relevant.
There's a couple of websites out there, specifically in the German side, we're saying the perfect pitch desk, you raise 70 millions, whatever. What do you think about that? Because young founders get like, oh, okay, the CEO, this one had 100 million from VC, that one 50 million, these 2 million. Oh, it's very easy to get money. And then they go on this website, they see whatever has become a unicorn and has had an investment with this pitch desk. What do you think about that one? It's like a template, just go down, and what do you think about that?
I think it's definitely oversimplified. For example, it depends a lot on the business that you're working in also. For example, we recently saw a pitch deck for a startup that raised 50 million seed and wanted 300 million Series A, and it's a hardware battery startup. So they need lots of money, but behind that you have assets. So instead of you compare it to a fully software-based startup that is much more scalable, it's much easier than that. And then it comes down to the ambition level that you mentioned before. I think that if you raise not enough as a startup, then you won't have time to actually develop your business, to go and do sales, because you finish the financing round and you immediately have to start the next financing round because you only have run one way for a couple of months. So it should be large enough, but of course, one financing round is usually not going to be enough.
And if I add to that, right, the more you raise, the less you get, or for the more you have to do your exit, right? So to understand the VC model of, hey, each startup that they invest in, it needs to have the potential of a 10x. So if you do like your Series A for 300 million, well, where do you end, right? And just knowing that and then thinking, okay, what is then left for me as a founder actually to take that up, and it's that realistic? So what I tell the startups that come to me is really like, think of the next 2 years, think of what you really need the money for. So do your financials, do it in a book, And what do you need until the next round? To really, what you said, right? Have the next round in mind. When do you want to raise it? And then what do you need the money for? And then you go with that.
And maybe just going back to your aspect of can you learn from successful pitch decks? Again, the pitch deck is not really what makes the biggest difference, but you definitely can learn a lot from them. And specifically, you can learn the kind of storytelling that you need for fundraising, right? And the key secret is really get to the point very quickly. So to give you maybe some idea about what VC life is in our daily life, in our fund team, we look with, what are we now, 9 people in total. We look at about 4,000 pitch decks every year, 4,000, right? Out of those, we talk to about 700 startups every year. Then about 30 startups make it to the last round, the partner meeting, where we take the final decision, and then we ended up investing in 10 startups, right? So from 4,000 down to 10. If you want to be in these 10, you have to first crack this first step, right, of the 4,000 to the next 700. And you can only do that, honestly, if I'm able, from your pitch deck, from your written deck, to understand what you do in 2 to 3 minutes. There are actually statistics from DocSend and all these places where they measured how long do VCs look at pitch decks, and it's actually 2.5 minutes on average, right? And getting to the point very quickly is really a difficult to learn skill. You can learn it, but you need probably external coaches who help you sharpen your message over and over again. And you just have to get much, much more specific with every step. It's not easy at all. I mean, for instance, one of our companies, Lecce, actually raised a Series A from Sequoia Capital, the presumably most successful VC firm in the world. And it was the result of working on the pitch deck and the whole message and the whole story behind it for 1.5 years consistently. So that's not something that you do over the weekend. You really have to constantly optimize these things.
Can I ask you something? For the 4,000 or to get down to the 700, right? Everybody talks about networking. Does it help if the pitch deck doesn't come over the website, but gets you like referred or from like one of your portfolio companies that knows somebody?
That's a great question. Over the existence of our firm, we have invested in, I think, about 300, 350 companies in total. And we recently ran a statistic about where did these things actually come from. And you can upload your pitch deck on our website, so very happy to see your website. But unfortunately, the result was that we invested in exactly 0 startups based on cold inbound upload from the website. We did invest in cold emails. So if somebody sends me an email, first they have to figure out what my email is, right? First intelligence test, and then they send me a pitch deck and a nice intro mail and say, oh, I saw you invested in such and such company, and here's how we could fit into that. You have my attention, absolutely. I'm going to do a call with you if it's a good fit for my investment strategy. Even better if we get a recommendation from one of our angel investors that we work with, or from a university professor that we know, whatever it might be, right, or from a partner program like yours. So that's all an initial filter that helps us cut through all the noise of these 4,000 pitch decks.
You had been as well in the US. I just heard a lot of stuff yesterday about the US, that it's very different in sorts of VC, startup mentality. Can you maybe share us your opinion on the difference between Switzerland startup ecosystem and the American one?
Yes, there are a few. It starts at universities. So I spent some time at MIT in Boston, which is of course one of the top engineering schools. And the young students there constantly talk about what startup they want to start, right? When you go to ETH or EPFL, they talk about, should I go work for Siemens or Google, right? That's typically the first question. So that it starts there, and there's a lot more systematic activity to really encourage especially young people to go into entrepreneurship. Then the second aspect is this aspect of ambition level, right? In Switzerland, you often see great entrepreneurs, great teams who want to build a great company, but they don't necessarily have this huge ambition level of being absolutely world dominating. And yes, you have to be a bit crazy to start and run a VC finance company, but that's really the difference that we see. And then the third aspect is the fear of failure, right, which is still very present in Switzerland and Europe in general. And in America, I wouldn't say nobody cares, but it's much, much less of a topic. So when you fail with a startup, then everybody congratulates you because great experience, right? Go work on your next one. And in Switzerland, you almost get arrested. No, not arrested, but you will, raise some eyebrows. And I think that's something that culturally we have to overcome.
You're saying the exact same words she did say yesterday. Failure is okay, and she said in Switzerland, maybe eidgenössische Steuerverwaltung, they come after you, they want still the taxes on your money. Failure, I mean, startups fail. I guess VC do too, right? How do you handle that one? Because somebody made a decision to invest in those companies, they fail, like as I said, they're failing a lot at this very moment. How do you deal with that one? As a corporate, for example, making more than energy.
So I've heard it being said that it takes around $20 million to educate a VC investor. So that's the cost of failure. I hope I'm not going to be that expensive. In my previous job was not for Axpo, but in the digital media world. I've seen a couple of examples of what not to do. And I think in investing in general, I mean, first of all, it always involves luck, where the market's going to go. As we see right now in a downturn, it's much more likely that a startup that is inherently risky is going to fail. But second, it takes a lot of hard work and really trying to understand the essence of a startup and to get to know the team that you want to invest in. And third, and I think that's very important, is to also then let them do their job. So I've seen a couple of examples where after an investment, basically the corporate that was investing got too involved, the legal contracts were too big, there were too many clauses, and it basically suffocated the startup. So that's equally important, I think, is to let the entrepreneurs be entrepreneurs, and as an investor, like us as Axpo, help the entrepreneurs be more successful with us in the cap table than without.
I mean, failure is part of our job, right? And it's part of entrepreneurship. And you probably know the statistic that out of 10 companies that get VC money, one is probably going to succeed really well and hopefully wildly. 2 or 3 are going to perform pretty nicely, and the rest goes out of business. That's just the fact, right? The problem is we never know which ones are going to be the successful ones out of these 10s that we invest in. So that's something we have to accept, and our job as an investor is also to sometimes help founders through these very difficult times, right? And again, I know that from my own entrepreneurial experience, my second startup, that was the first I did in the United States, actually failed after 3 years. We fought really hard, but it just didn't happen for various reasons. And that's really, really tough. I mean, one of our angel investors was my father-in-law, and I lost $70,000 of his money. Can you imagine how popular that makes you at the next family dinner? So, it's often very personal and very stressful. And I think when you pick a VC, talk to other companies that they invested in, especially those that had difficulties and maybe didn't go so well, and ask them about how this VC behaved, because that's going to be very crucial on your entrepreneurial journey. So spoiler alert, startups never develop linearly. Almost every startup you have ever heard of had difficult times in between, and you want investors on your side who can deal with that and who are going to support you in that.
And on top of that, right, I think it's extremely important for the startup that if you struggle, talk to your investors, right? It's not about really knowing, okay, who the investor is, but really talk to them and say, hey, I think in 6 months we're going to run into real deep shit. So what can we do?
So to summarize everything, it's 7 minutes are okay and important, but it's about know your investor, know your strengths, know your weakness, and then just go in with full passion. Thank you very much for being my guests, and this is your round of applause.